Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Please welcome our panellists today, Trent Broberg, Chief Operating Officer from Truckstop, Grant Crawford from KeppTruckin, and from Emerge, and Kim Larsen from KeppTruckin. Guys, today's session is about emerging technology and freight visibility. But before we dive into what freight visibility means, can I get a quick, maybe a couple of minutes, an introduction, who you are, where you're from, and sort of what your view of the world is?
Sure, yeah. How is everybody doing out there? Trent Broberg, truckstop.com. So I've been with Truckstop for about 5 years. I actually grew up in the trucking industry with now Knight Swift, but Swift Transportation. Kind of cut my teeth in the industry, greasing fifth wheels, changing tires, riding down on a truck. Spent some time in the global freight forwarding world, and now obviously on the technology side, which fits me well because my personality is pretty nerdy. Those that would know me, so I call myself a closet nerd a little bit. But really, truckstop.com, we're a freight matching platform. We are really focused on that long tail of carriers out there. The first thing that goes through my mind and every partner on truckstop.com is how do we help the owner-operators in the business be more successful, empower them to make decisions, and really connect them to the industry.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the hardcores out there that have made it all the way to 3 o'clock on Wednesday. We appreciate you being here for sure. My name is Grant Crawford, president of Emerge. I've been in transportation my whole career, just started year 29. I find myself literally the oldest guy at my software company, which I don't know how the heck that happened, but I am. Was lucky enough to grow up literally in the front lines. Started in 1991 loading trucks for then RPS, now FedEx Ground. Operated a forklift for a company called American FreightWaves while I was working my way through that turned into FedEx Freight. And grew up in the operations side of FedEx Freight, really. Ran 4 different service centers for FedEx Freight, as well as was director of operations there for a few years for the Northeast U.S. and ultimately international VP. Ran Roadrunner Freight for about 3 years. And at the back end of those 26, I looked around at the industry, and I'd got to know a lot of different players from a lot of different sides. And the one thing I noticed from a lot of the logistics guys I worked with and the software guys I worked with was they had a lot better quality of life than I did. Being the guy worrying about the trucks and worrying about the drivers, worrying about the regs, that was definitely a taxing lifestyle. So I jumped at the chance to join Emerge, and excited to be in the software side now, living the good life.
Well, welcome, thank you. Kim?
Yeah, nice to meet you guys. I actually think this session is slightly better attended than some of the earlier ones.
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
So I'm with KeppTruckin. I head up data science at KeppTruckin, so that's machine learning, analytics, forecasting, that kind of stuff. I'm new to the trucking industry, probably about 4 months in. Spent time at other companies like Uber and Stitch Fix. I spent some time in financial services, but new to trucking. It's definitely been a fascinating industry to get to learn for sure. Now, I do feel like I'm slightly underdressed compared to these two gentlemen, but I'm well dressed for a data scientist. I would just to point that out. Now, in terms of visibility, the way I think about it is freight visibility. In particular, it really is about understanding what's going on from the time the load is picked up to the time it's dropped off. So when is it picked up? Where is it on the map? What's the ETA? Do we think it's going to be late?
Right.
When did it arrive? What's going on at the port or the warehouse? Is the driver in detention or not? And then you can get further with that, like what's going on with the trailer, or we talk about sensors inside of reefers and that kind of stuff. So I think that type of visibility is what would really help with reliable trips and load coverage from end to end.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of us in the industry that grew up in an era where the object was lack of visibility, right? So all of our margins of profitability were based on not telling anyone anything and sort of sneaking around. There's a whole era of drivers on the road right now who were quietly horrified about the whole concept about ELDs because they really didn't want anybody knowing what they were doing. It wasn't because they were unsafe, it's just they wanted the flexibility that came with obscurity. And of course now we're fast forward, we've got another couple of million trucks with ELD devices in them and telematics devices pushing off a position history, it creates a whole nother level of visibility into the industry that we've never seen before in the road transport sector. I think some of the other modes are a little bit lagging. We've got really good position history on ships. We've got some position history on trains, but not a lot. We've got a lot of visibility in commercial vehicles, whether it be phones with apps pushing off a lat long on an Uber car, for example, or a truck or a trailer or a refrigeration motor. So there's lots of visibility, but Trent, can you, following on from Kim, can you sort of define what freight visibility means? Because it's a term I hear a lot about, and I hear different meanings. So from your perspective at Truck Stop, what's it mean to you?
Yeah, fundamentally, when you hear visibility, you think track and trace during the freight execution life cycle, origin to destination. We take a little bit different approach in understanding what the visibility is, and I mentioned this on the onset. The carrier community, the small carriers out there, the 10 trucks or less that make up 90+% of the trucks on the road, they're looking for freight visibility before they know what the load is, right? So they're trying to schedule out their day. There's two things fundamentally that every driver, and Dean knows this, is trucks out front, that they want in their lifestyle, and it's get me paid and get me home. And fundamentally, thinking from that perspective, we view freight visibility at the onset of the creation of the load, or even before that, and understanding the behaviors of the drivers and where we could help empower them with freight in their day-to-day business. So obviously there is, once you get the rate con and you're going through the freight execution life cycle, there's the mobile apps, there's the ELD providers and that connectivity. That's more of the typical visibility side of things, but really looking at it from the carrier's perspective and understanding what they need to feed their families. That's really the way we look at it.
Right. Grant?
Yeah, so I really look at it two different sides. Again, going back and thinking about those early years and when I broke into the business, the visibility consisted of you'd close a trailer out on the dock by signing a piece of paper and throwing that in the back. And maybe you'd get around to showing it was dispatched some point, within 12 hours.
Right.
And the customer said it's going to be there in 5 days. That's what the transit map said, and there's that black hole until it arrives. So there's the customer side of the view of it, which for us at Emerge, being focused really the shipper being job 1A for us and carrier 1B. We want to make sure that we're providing them the visibility that they need. It doesn't necessarily mean that they need to know every minute of the day where that truck's at,
Right.
but tailor something that allows them to choose the level of visibility that they require and have the ability to provide that to them. So we're working diligently not only in our own development as well as partnering with folks out there that will in essence provide a la carte menu to say here's what I want from a visibility standpoint. But to Trent's point on the driver side, absolutely, I'm sure we'll chat more as we get into it, but agree with everything he said. Growing up and on the docks, getting to know the drivers incredibly well. Whatever we can do to provide them, again, where's that next load going to come from? How do I know that I'm going to get home to see my family when I want to get home, especially those over-the-road guys? That visibility is crucially important.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. I've done a few million miles as a driver, and I think the easiest part's driving, right? I can teach anybody to steer a truck. The hardest part about driving a truck and being a truck driver is all the other stuff that goes on. It's the traffic, it's the weather, it's delays, but most importantly, it's the unpaid time you spend not driving.
Yep.
And with ELDs now in particular, it's a really big issue because every minute I spend on a dock not getting paid, it's coming off my 60 or 70 at the end of the week. And what it does psychologically, it would force me to go out and cut corners, push harder, brake later, corner harder, have more hard brake events, possibly have more incidents and accidents, which we see statistically. If the longer you're held on a dock, and I think you've put out some great data on that, the longer you're held in detention, the higher the probability of high speeding and accidents. So I think that truck drivers don't join this industry to sit on a loading dock, and that's where I've seen lack of visibility there. When you bump a dock, it's like a black hole when it comes to data integration, and that's where I see the biggest problem because we put so much optimization into our trucking companies, but then we give it to a driver to execute on. But there's lack of visibility at the dock level, and I see that's where this sort of shipper to carrier integration I think is a really big issue. But so I'd like to speak, if you could speak to that, because I think that's an area we could work on.
Yeah, I mean that's an excellent point for sure. Is once the driver is arrived, now it's almost like the clock starts again, but when does that clock start, right? And from a pure visibility standpoint, one thing that your comments made me think about is, you know, a much discussed topic as we talk about this tightening of capacity per se. You know, it's my opinion, and I think that, you know, a lot of people are sharing in this as there's more dialogue, that we just haven't been forced until, you know, recently as an industry to be smart about our capacity.
Right.
So again, back to visibility, it's not just everything we've talked about so far, it's those large fleets that are running 20% empty, and of just, you know, deal with the fact that, hey, I know I'm going to have a few hundred miles of air, you know, going back in this direction, providing them, you know, tools. Again, and we feel like that's something that what Emerge is working to do, is bring those fleets in, use that visibility. Hey, I've got 400 miles that I'm running empty this days a week, and marry that up with the availability of it. And if it is built correctly, you know, marrying that information together with the right shipper, it then cuts down to that dead time on the dock that driver had before he goes back, and he's offloaded, it's time to go, and now he has something to put right back on there, you know, within a certain radius of that facility.
Even within companies, you see that sort of inefficiency. Drivers will tell you that they'll drive one way empty and pass another truck going the other way empty to pick up essentially freight at either end where they came from, which is, you would think it's unheard of, but that's the kind of stuff that drives drivers insane.
Oh, and that's the kind of stuff that, you know, let's just say from an enterprise standpoint, where we have multiple operating companies inside one enterprise organization. You know, sometimes you assume that they're sharing that information that historically that necessarily wasn't the case. Of course, I'm not alluding to anything historically that I had to deal with. Nothing in Memphis or Chicago.
You see that all the time, right? When you have trucks hauling sailboat fuel going either way, and it's because the left hand's not talking to the right hand, and they're not understanding that they've got a perfect match here from a dedicated situation. So part of that is freight visibility, right? And understanding where the loads are and how you can leverage some of the technologies that are present today, or some of the emerging technologies into the future to understand, how do I optimize, right? I mean, that's an optimization question. And on the dock, you know, trying to understand and give the data, you know, the visibility to that driver before they take the load, or before you negotiate on those rates with the customer. It'd be really important to know that XYZ retailer might hold you up on average 6 hours because there's no parking. So, you know, the poor driver, you know, effectively has to go in, runs out of hours, no parking, personal conveyance only gets you so far. So there's a big challenge in that, as you mentioned there, Dean. I think that's also the biggest challenge in the underutilization of the industry, and I think that's where the big gap is that everybody in this room is hoping, I hope we're all trying to solve, is how we just optimize that, because you know, we have to hire less drivers if you're using 11 hours driving instead of the average 7.5 hours driving.
It's running, I think it's just under 7 now. I think it's about 7 hours and 3 minutes on average for long haul drivers. But if you think about that, they're still leaving quite a few hours on the table, right? And you'll say, well, why is that? Is it inexperience, lack of parking? Is it poor routing? So Kim, we talked last week about things like dwell time and home time. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing at your company as it relates to these sorts of things.
Yeah, so there's a couple of efforts here. One is just to leverage the ELD data. We have a fairly large network to understand things like dwell time at ports and different logistics spots. And you know, with the amount of data we have nowadays, you can get pretty granular here by day, by hour, and that type of thing. And while I know that doesn't necessarily solve the issue of detention, it provides a lot of visibility that wasn't there before. So that's one thing. Also, you just think that there would be less like human dispute going on when you have very crisp data that shows that this truck entered this geofence at this point in time and then was stuck for X hours. And so that's one area. But I think the other area is, and you guys alluded to this, when you're going from a world of like highly fragmented industry, lack of digital connectivity across carriers, to a world now where soon, you know, every single truck is going to have an ELD, and you're going to get GPS pings with high frequency. From a marketplace perspective, if we take this data, use it in a responsible way in the marketplace for matching, you would just have to believe that we're going to get a more efficient marketplace, which would then translate to, you know, less empty miles, better margins and that type of thing. So these are both efforts that we're involved with.
It doesn't take much, to increase miles per tractor week to get drivers some more pay.
Right.
There's not a lot of work that needs to be done. It's just, I think some companies get caught up in being busy,
Right.
the busyness of being busy, and they can't really stop that sort of production line to actually step back and say, how could I actually do this better?
Right.
So you touched on a good point, and I'll go back the other way. Data integrations, right? So I spent years here helping companies map data from disparate data systems into and flattening it out and trying to make some sense of it. And we were able to show things like the average driver was running about 7 hours a week. What fleets didn't realise was how little hours drivers, per day. They didn't realise how unproductive they were. What they didn't realise was when they were stopping each work day to start their 10-hour break. So not only were they stopping, short of the 11 hours, they were trading off roll time for finding a parking spot. And it was about 4:30 to 5:30 in the afternoon. So these are the regional to over-the-road guys. And that was kind of alarming because they were leaving money, the drivers were consciously leaving money on the table every single day. And so if you had visibility into parking space availability down the road, would that change anything? So it requires a huge data integration between players that have IP. And that's one of the things I see is sort of a bit of an obstacle, is how do we actually work towards creating that marketplace where you've got data, we can create that visibility, and what would you say would be some of the obstacles to that, like in terms of integrating data?
When you're saying integrating data, I just want to clarify, you're thinking across companies or across the different type of sensors that we would pull from?
Mostly sensors and disparate data. So you're doing integrations with a customer, for example. You've got, they don't version the driver ID, they reuse truck numbers, things like that.
Right, yeah, I don't think, honestly, I don't think integration of sensors should be too hard. Some standardization would obviously be needed, and you'd have to probably pick one of these devices to be the hub. I'm not an engineer, but that is the hub that's kind of capturing all this data from the different sensors and then bringing that into a standardized database. But I don't think it should be too hard to do, assuming we could get some standardization across the industry. Now, even within KeppTruckin, we have trailer trackers, we have the ELD, we have dashboard cameras, and all these work within the same ecosystem. So if they're not working as like disparate systems, so they're connected. But yeah, I don't think it should be too hard.
What about with other vendors though, where you've got other ecosystems you're trying to pair to? So that's where the roadblocks are, right?
Yeah, that would be where the it's not a technological roadblock, it's a roadblock in terms of standardizing how the different sensors send out information and how it gets stored.
And one of the challenges there, obviously from the technical side, the integrations can happen if people are willing to play nice, I guess, with each other from standardization.
Exactly.
And have that centralized neutrality in a lot of what we're doing today in all of our disparate systems. The other challenge is you're talking about some really sensitive information from a liability standpoint, and I think that that's a big hurdle that we'll all have to come together with at some point in time to understand the regulatory process, work with Capitol Hill, and understand how we can manage that data, because the liabilities associated, if you have two brokers in a room and you talk to one, they say, I want the visibility. You talk to the other, they said, don't want it. Right? And there's reasons for both, and that there's this big challenge because we're at this inflection point in the industry where who knows, right? And there's some precedents set already, and time will tell.
And hence the name of the conference, Transparency, because we're about transparency, but of course that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Yeah. Because it's challenging, and
it is. It's change management as well, too. So.
Yeah, so that dialogue is fantastic, and the first thing that comes to mind for me is, thank God, there's guys like Kim and Trent that are now been attracted to this space.
Right.
And all kidding aside, I hate to sound like the old guy again, but you go back to, I'd say, when I broke into this business, there used to be a saying that you don't find transportation finds you. Right. And now I look at what we're in the midst of, this this front side of the technology coming in and making us better. And I think the last few days of this conference and interacting with guys like Kim and Trent, and the gentleman that I spoke with last night, he was an MIT grad, and now supply chain is sexy, and that's just fantastic because we need that as an industry if we truly are going to get where we want to go. So there's guys like me that maybe know and I know Trent had some early times in his career in the front line, so we have that applied experience, but be able to combine that with a gentleman like Kim and his background, that's going to get us where we need to go as an industry.
Right. As I travel around, I talk to drivers a lot, and one of the common themes you hear of is lack of respect. Right, from shippers, from driver managers, fleet managers. I've worked in some fleets where they refer to the driver by number, not a name. Really basic things like that where they screw it up from the start. And I'd just like to ask a question of each of you, and Trent, I'll start with you. What do you, you talked a little bit earlier about being driver focused. What do you think you can do with technology to make the driver's life a lot better? Because when they sit out there on their own, it's a fairly lonely world. They've got way too much windscreen time, little problems become big problems. They're always trying to deal with family problems from 1,000 miles away. It's an incredibly stressful lifestyle. And then you get sat on a dock for a long time and told you can't use the bathroom. Things like that. It's a really tough world for drivers that very few people understand. So I'm really curious to see how technology addresses those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's really personifying the driver, to your point. It's giving them a voice, right? And is there a platform out there that gives them that voice to say, just as I would Yelp or Google review a restaurant I went to that I might have had a poor experience or something or a great experience, similar facets like that, because that holds accountability. So a driver knows there's no restroom facilities, there's no showers, there's no parking before he gets there. That's a big item. But to your point, you're right. I mean, just being a number, how would we all feel in this room if I was no longer Trent and I was employee 123? And you become more of a commodity rather than a really empowered individual in the organization. It's no different with the driving community, especially the owner-operators out there, because by nature of their business, it's transactional. So I don't really need to get to know Dean, who just showed up at my dock, because it doesn't really add any value tomorrow. But understanding through technology how we're connected and the data sharing associated to that, I think that's where we can really
missing links with the shippers, though. I think we work in isolation too much. So if you talk about data integration, it's one of the big areas we've got to make inroads is with the shippers. I think they'll drive a lot of change. But we've got to get them to understand that there's value in being respectful and treating drivers, in a way where they can be more productive. Because ultimately it comes back in the rates they're charged. The cost of operating a truck business. Great.
Yep, for sure. And again, this is an area I couldn't be more passionate about. Again, having grown up with those guys, the first 15 years of my career was working day in, day out with them. They are the lifeblood of this industry. No matter what, we can get caught up in what we do and the value we bring. There's not a single one of us in here, unless there's any drivers in the crowd, that are more important to our industry than them. So, how do we make their lives better? I mean, absolutely from a respect standpoint, one thing that I think of, again, this dialogue, is sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. And, maybe this tightening that we've went through and now that we feel like we're starting to evolve out of was good from an awareness standpoint. So now we've been reminded again how important that driver community is, right? So it starts with that. Because you talk to any of them, that's the thing, is a stereotypical, the truck driver stereotype, right? Or, I'm going up and down the road. I was talking to someone yesterday evening, and they said, I hate driving I-85 from Atlanta to Charlotte. There's trucks everywhere. And it slipped out of their mouth, and they caught themselves, right? So those guys deal with that every day. So, one of the things that I'm most excited about that we're doing at Emerge and platforms like us that create these marketplaces that connect drivers directly with shippers is at the end of the day, the overall transaction has a lower overhead, which means there's more money going in that driver's pocket. And when you combine all these things we're doing that we've talked about today to make their life easier, combined with, you're going to get paid more, that ultimately is, sort of the holy grail of what we're trying to accomplish as an industry, I think.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree. One of the reasons I joined this industry is exactly this. I think what we can do now with data is actually going to make the industry more efficient. Is going to help drivers. I think this asymmetric relationship you're alluding to is going to have to change with this level of visibility. And I think there's a couple of, there's like two main areas here where I see data being able to make a huge difference. One, as we talk about, is on the marketplace side. If we can leverage this data to generate more visibility into the marketplace, where are drivers? Are they driving empty right now? Where are they going? Where do they call home? Where are their preferred lanes? I think drivers were able to tap into demand that they wouldn't have seen before at the right time at the right place, which then would lead to better earnings. On the other side too, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, is when you think about the ELD data, and I think the typical reporting now is stuff like hard brakes and rapid acceleration and that kind of stuff. But there's so much more we can do. Right. I'm new to trucking, but as far as I can tell, every mile driven is not the same. Correct. Right? If I'm going down a mountain in the middle of the winter in the dark, that is very different than going on a straight freeway somewhere in the fall. And with the ELD data, we can now provide a whole new view of this. It's not just about how many times you have a hard brake. If you're on a road segment where people brake a lot, then that's actually okay, right? Then you shouldn't be dinged for that down the line, because you're in a treacherous section, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's stuff we could do on fuel optimization, route planning, working with companies such as you guys, and integrating with TMSs, better ETAs, and that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, it will mean more demand, less deadheading, and just better operational efficiency.
All right. So, just on that point, I did some text analytics at a prior company, and we were able to find that in 30% of the accidents, the word waiting occurred in the freeform text analytics from the in-cab mobile com. I'm waiting on a dock, I'm waiting on paperwork, I've been waiting all day. So the word waiting was highly predictive of hard brake events that preceded an accident.
Right.
So whether it's messages in a AS400 or whatever system the company's using, freeform text is actually really insightful, because when you start to see drivers request home time more frequently, it's telling you something that they're likely about to quit, that there's something going on at home. So just on the demographic side, just quickly, Trent, can we just sort of wrap up? We haven't got long, but what sort of things do you think we can do to improve the trucking industry for the next generation?
Yeah, you got the millennials, which I just kind of buzzed the tower on the millennial group. That group is really technology focused, and from there on, Gen Zs and into the future, my kids and all of your kids, kids will be focused on technology. We talked about it backstage, and a lot on really where the technology will lead out in the driving community and the drivers. And it's all about what we all just mentioned, and making that driver's lives easier. How do you get the data exchange? How do you empower them to make more money and then get home to their kids' softball game?
Yep. Grant?
Yeah, I agree that. I don't know if I could say it any better. Everything we've talked about today, the visibility, the ease, the quality of life, I mean, these are all areas that have to be addressed. We are addressing, but make no mistake about it. If they aren't addressed, if we don't see these things through, then it's the definition of insanity. Exactly. Nothing's going to change. We're not going to attract this.
We've got a great opportunity to change. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to thank Trent Broberg from Truck Stop, Grant Crawford from Emerge, and Kim Larsen from KeppTruckin. Thank you, gentlemen.